Well, that was fun trying to get this show launched. I think I launched this shell no more than 3 times. Came on air, wasn't ready, had to hit the go live button. It was an absolute mess. How's it going, guys? It's Thursday. That doesn't usually mean you see me. In fact, last week you didn't see me at all, as consistent as I've been lately. Normally, this is the Nocturnal Knockout on a Wednesday. However, for the second time in a row, coming to you from a Thursday evening. Normally, I lead you into AEW Dynamite. I think tonight I'm probably going to lead you into Thursday night football. Commanders Packers. Should be a good one, actually. I'm fairly positive we'll get out of here plenty of time to go check out that action. I should give a formal introduction after that really scattered intro. I am Rob. You can see the handles there in the corner and the misspelled last name. This is the Nocturnal Knockout, a Brass Ring Media podcast on the Brass Ring Media Network. How are you guys doing? Wild times we're living in, isn't it? There's a lot going on inside and outside of wrestling that it's hard to always maintain all of your perspective, know about what's important, and just navigating ourselves through all of this. And on that note of navigating ourselves through all of this, how are you guys feeling last Friday night? I got to know. I come on here week after week after week, and I complain about the lack of quality of some of the WWE shows that we get. In particular, WWE SmackDown, which that's a snooze fest every week. Has been since they went to 3 hours many, many months ago, and has seemingly not gotten better since being reduced down to 2 hours. They had a really eventful edition of SmackDown this past Friday. Perhaps you saw it. In fact, I know you saw it. You had to have seen it. You had John Cena on there. You had John Cena wrestling a match. You had Brock Lesnar coming out there. And the night ended with what everyone's been waiting for and everyone's been talking about, the return of the one and only AJ Lee. She came back Friday night looking jacked. Those washboard abs that she had going on over there. Back out on Monday Night Raw, cutting promos across from Becky Lynch. She got CM Punk coming out there. And we got the setup for the upcoming match. So it's all set. The speculation is completely done. AJ Lee, after 10 years, after a full freaking decade, is back in WWE. It's funny to think about, but if you actually look at the timeline of when she departed and when she returned, she was gone from WWE a little bit longer than her husband, who had his legendary walkout of WWE. But his was slightly less than 10 years. His went from 2014 to late 2023, which I know was really hitting that on the border, but his was technically shorter. A little less acrimony, I would say, in the AJ Lee split, but not a ton. And there's been a pretty good response, I think, to AJ Lee's return. People are genuinely excited to see her. You see members of the roster are excited to see her. I thought that was a great line in her promo. For someone who I don't view as that old or that much of the past, for her to say, I'm your favorite wrestler's favorite wrestler, and to be basically right about that, I thought was a nice flex, honestly, by AJ. And I think what we've seen promo-wise out of her it's been pretty good. Not that she was ever bad at promo, and she's definitely extremely, extremely over right now in the show. So I'm not going to dispute or argue with any of that. Maybe we'll talk a little bit later what the future really could be for AJ Lee in that kind of stuff. I mean, that's a conversation for a different time. This is the Nocturnal Knockout here. We like to sometimes take deep dives into the past and see what kind of current context it could put us on. We like to dig up old stuff. We like to look at slides. We like to look at old tweets. And speaking of tweets, we should talk about tweeting just a little bit. A few months ago at this point, I kind of started playing with the concept of having like a wrestling Twitter Hall of Fame, if you recall. And there was one of the legendary Tony Khan tweets that got put in as the first entry. Now, the plan was for there to be weeks and weeks of Twitter Hall of Fame content. Unfortunately, one of the ideas with building the Twitter Hall of Fame was to basically showcase the hilarity of many of the Hulk Hogan tweets. Well, as I was formulating that plan, Hulk Hogan also passed away within the course of those couple of weeks. So, for several reasons, I just kind of didn't want to talk a lot of Hogan on here because either I would be too offensive of the dead, or I don't know, maybe we'd be honoring someone that we really didn't want to honor in that moment or the way we were doing it, or all of those things that would have been going down right after his passing. So I decided let's take a little bit of a break from the Twitter Hall of Fame and we'll get it back going. There's never going to be a shortage of wrestling tweets to be enshrined, to look at, to check out, from the hilarity to the serious to the impactful. There'll never be a shortage. So I'm never worried about that going away. Just took a little bit of a break from it. But with AJ Lee coming back into the fold, I had AJ Lee on the mind. And I'm not someone who would be caught necessarily chanting AJ Lee at an event. I would have never have chanted CM Punk at an event. I went to a few events during his hiatus. Swig of soda for the working man. And when I think of AJ Lee, though, I don't actually think of a whole lot that she did within wrestling. I'm not saying she's bad, but I think in a certain way, she's a product of her time. Now, this is not to say she has no talent. And it's not to say if she were to come along 5 years later, I think everyone would admit that she would have been a much, much bigger star. Hard to get, much bigger than what she's been perceived at now or the heights she reached before, but she could have really been, I think, astronomical had she have come around slightly later, when women's wrestling in America and in WWE in particular was much more focused on. She had to do a lot of the dirty work right before WWE started putting a little bit of an extended focus on the women's division. So when I think of her legacy, I think less about the things she did in the ring. And she had some huge segments, some huge angles. The stuff she did with Daniel Bryan and CM Punk in that one summer. I thought the stuff she did with Dolph and Big E was also very, very entertaining. If you recall all of that stuff, and then her feuds with the Bellas actually had some entertainment and some bite to them. And then she's the one that brought Paige to us, at least on the main roster, and those were the two that were so closely associated at that time. So there's plenty of fond AJ Lee memories in the ring, but for me, I've only got one core AJ Lee memory. And this happened over a decade ago, this core memory that I have. And this core memory is also going to be an entrance into the Wrestling Twitter Hall of Fame. The tweets I'm referring to go back over a decade. In fact, they go back to early 2015. So everything we're about to talk about, what I need for you to do, I need you to put your headspace back into early 2015. Think about the wrestling landscape, think about society, think about culture, think about all that. Late 2014, early 2015. Think of everything that had happened, everything that surrounded that. And that's what we're going to evaluate here today. Let's give a little background, though. As we mentioned before, women's wrestling, WWE, only a thing in the past whenever they would really, really want to care about it, or they would really have a dynamic star, they would try to push. And even then, it would be rare that women were the focus of the shows, with the exception, the very, very big exception in that time period, of one Stephanie McMahon. Stephanie McMahon was involved in every major angle. She was basically the top heel in the company. And as you recall, nobody, and I mean nobody, ever got their comeuppance on her. Well, except for one person may have got it one time. And we'll break that down in a little bit of how AJ Lee actually got that comeuppance. When we talk about late 2014, though, in pro wrestling, early 2015, we're not thinking of great women's wrestling. Take yourself back to WrestleMania 32. Recall a women's match from there. I remember one specifically. In fact, I'm pretty sure it involved AJ Lee and Paige and the Bellas, if I'm not mistaken, but it came and it went. Honestly, probably the most significant female performances on that show were Lana coming out with Rusev and Stephanie's segments with The Rock, Ronda Rousey. I don't think she interfered in the Sting match, but I wouldn't be surprised if she was the one that actually hit the final blow on Sting before Trips laid down his pedigree. That would actually have fit the time. So women's wrestling, in terms of the main roster, was not really on the surface at this point. Where women's wrestling was starting to grab people's attention, though, was down in NXT. So as AJ Lee and Nikki Bella and Natalia and Brie Bella and Caitlyn for a time, you think about the women that were around in that period, they were getting 2-minute matches in like death spots on shows. And I think this time period was really, really rough for women's wrestling because the women weren't even really being portrayed as stars in any sort of way. You can take issue with the way that Lita and Trish were portrayed as, really these objects of affection and desire, even more so than anything that had to do with their athletic ability. But at least you can argue they were presented as stars. In the PG WWE, the women's wrestlers were like these benevolent, sometimes catty competitors who were just off to the side. They were clearly like a sideshow. They were not a focus of any of the shows, the way a Trish or a Lita or a China could have been in the past. The women in this time period were not being presented like that. Now, on the other hand, and this started happening, I would say early in 2014, where people started to notice. It happened before that, but in early 2014, when people start getting access to the WWE network, NXT starts to blow up as a brand, and we start to take notice. You start to see Kevin Owens, Sami Zayn, Kenta, Adrian Neville. You remember the good old days. Prince Devitt ends up coming in. We get this indie boom, this indie swell in NXT, in a WWE created product. The other thing that swelled up in NXT was their women's division. And it's always been funny because when you think about the Four Horsemen, 3 of the 4 of them did have experience elsewhere. Some of them pretty extensive experience. Becky had been wrestling for almost a decade at that point. Bailey had been around the Indies. Mercedes had been around. Charlotte was obviously very new, but it still felt like these were newer, more unknown wrestlers that WWE was not necessarily creating from the ground up, but were presenting in a way that women had never really been presented on WWE television. The first one of these sort of epic matches I can recall was actually Natalya versus Charlotte with, I think, Brett and Rick in each other's corners, and that was like a really big match, and you had like the Fatal 4-Way. Eventually, it blossoms into where we were a few months later than after it is what we're talking about, where we have the legendary Bailey and Sasha matches in NXT in the summer of 2015. So there's all that build to build a desire and a demand for women's wrestling. Like, I'll be honest with you. I never was a person who was like, oh, the women shouldn't be on the show. And I'm not going to be one of those guys who say now that the women had a role in the show and it should be. No. Good wrestling is good wrestling. And the more main eventers you can have and the more divisions you can have like that, I think that's just a boon for a wrestling company in general. But I also wasn't necessarily clamoring to see women's wrestling put towards the top of the card because I just felt a lot less exposure to it, especially on an American level, to know that I would really care about it and really value it and that it could be like a real main event part of the show. For me, it was seeing it kind of happen in NXT, which maybe sort of snapped to it. Of course, I was just a little younger, naive, and didn't always think about stuff as clearly. But meanwhile, this is 2014, 2015. We are in the peak of Vince McMahon just controlling things, owning things, god-awful booking, no competition, nothing anyone can do about it. Just this real stasis that was going on in pro wrestling. And then some of that was changing in 2014 and 2015. And again, I got to credit NXT. NXT brought a certain kind of cool or hip factor to WWE that they really hadn't had in a long time. NXT no longer has that. It no longer has that status to it, and it's no longer as novel. But at the time, that was definitely the case. And as I mentioned, I think you can argue that the women's revolution starts in the summer of 2025. Meanwhile, before the revolution, some things were happening that may have involved AJ Lee, at least indirectly. If you recall, just right before the revolution, something kind of big happened in WWE. Remember this whole thing that happened? CM Punk walking out right after the Royal Rumble in 2014. So that happened. CM Punk was gone, obviously, for like another 9 years. But that wasn't the end of the CM Punk story in 2014. A few different things went down in 2014. You had CM Punk obviously missed WrestleMania and everything that got shuffled as a result of that card. Going into the following summer, CM Punk was getting himself married to AJ Lee. And he just happened to get fired from WWE on his wedding day. I know, I believe you, Vince. You can't control when the mail arrives. They were aware, though, when that wedding was taking place, being that, they kind of had to give AJ Lee off to attend it, but it is what it is. So the tensions between the two camps probably couldn't have got much higher as that year wore on. We get it later into the year. We have the infamous Cole Cabana CM Punk podcast. Again, AJ Lee is not directly involved in that, but she is married to the guy who, through the course of the podcast, yielded himself and Cole Cabana a lawsuit for the things they alleged to WWE's medical team. And in the lawsuit, they did not pay a penny. They might have cost them their friendship, but they didn't pay a penny. So you can see where the tensions already were with AJ Lee and with management. And let's face it, it wasn't just management that CM Punk went after his departure. It wasn't just the big guy. It wasn't just Vince. It was Vince and, well, it was Triple H. Triple H was a major target. If anything, Triple H had like the most ire in that podcast, which is funny to think about the way that they all act like they're such good friends now and how everything is healed. And we'll talk about that later, and maybe it is, but all of that was odd. At the same time, they had AJ Lee's character really since the end of 2013, but even into 2014, sort of being this female version of CM Punk. Remember, she cut her version of the pipe bomb, and she would say these kind of edgy things that were very, very much nods to CM Punk, or very much in the vein of how CM Punk would say some things. On the WWE side, their peak in their campaign of PR. Like right now, WWE is so big that they're okay eating some PR pushback and blowback on certain issues. There's a few things they're willing to eat it because they know that they have that fan base big enough. And they know they're insulated with their media deals, with the stock price, but being owned by TKO now, there's a lot of things that insulate them. And there was a lot of things that insulated them back then. But back then, they were really insistent on presenting themselves and portraying themselves as this benevolent company, this benevolent corporation. Poor Stephanie McMahon has been quoted from that one conference for over a decade now with her famous line, and this is not going to the Wrestling Twitter Hall of Fame because it's not really involved in wrestling, although it could be because so much wrestling discourse has taken place off of this one freaking tweet. But we all recall the line by Stephanie McMahon that philanthropy was the future of marketing. So anytime in this time period when WWE would try to tell you what a good corporation it was and what good it was doing to the world and the important point that it had, it was always taken with many grains of salt. Not only is there the history that WWE has, the history that was being made at the time, from all we know now, there was also just the cynicism of it. The cynicism of, why are you portraying yourself like you're holier than thou when we know what you actually are? Like we've got a memory. It's not Men in Black where we just get we get mind bleeped out of it and we can't do nothing. What's up, Derek? So that was actually the last match, was right around WrestleMania, huh? So I thought she was around for a little bit longer, but there was also, remember, in this time period when CM Punk was gone at the beginning, there was like the AJ Lee is pregnant thing on the dirt sheets. And that was like a thing for like 2 weeks. And then she came back literally the next Monday and was bumping all over the place. So pretty sure that wasn't the case. And so, the clock's going from 2014 to 2015. WWE's all about their image, and it's award season. Now, I got to say, like the VMAs, I didn't watch them last Sunday, but they were trying to get me to watch them with that lineup. But I'm all for the music industry acquiring new fans and just catering to the people that they dug their fingers into years ago. I'm completely okay with that. As someone who listens to nothing but outdated music, I'm okay with that. But it seems like they're not necessarily trying to appeal to the younger crowd anymore. But award shows in general are kind of things that especially in the modern era. I think we get clips of, we can learn about. We don't really watch. We don't really care about. They feel very much like a rich person thing in every way, don't they? Like they're this gala that we're watching. Like, why should we care? I get it. Some could be entertaining, and even like I say that you care sometimes about who wins, but it's a rich person thing. And so at the award show, which I believe was the Oscars because of who is saying it, Patricia Arquette, she had a statement to make, and I'm going to go ahead and read that statement. Patricia Arquette said this: "To every woman who gave birth, to every taxpayer and citizen of this nation, we have fought for everybody else's equal rights. It's our time to have wage equality once and for all, and equal rights for women in the United States of America." Patricia Arquette. Now, I don't think there's anything that significant about what she said. Let me explain what I mean. I don't disagree with a word that she says. I I support income and wage equality. I support women's rights. Something they technically don't necessarily have in this country. Go look it up. Equal Rights Act, never really ratified. Anyway, I don't think it's that moving of those are not that moving of words, but I feel like that time period was a time period when Hollywood would really get off their shots at the award shows, and it didn't come across well. Like as someone who generally agrees with the sentiments of what the people were saying, they did just kind of come across like lame Hollywood people. And it is what it is. But no argument to what she had to say. But Stephanie, she had to add in her 2 cents. Here's what Stephanie had to do. She quote tweeted a graphic of the lines I just read to you. "Thank you at Patty Arquette for having the courage to fight for hashtag women's rights on such a grand platform." Again, on its own, I take no issue with that. I would actually agree with what Patricia Arquette was saying. But people did seem to take quite a bit of issue with Stephanie McMahon saying it. And even to this day, I pulled up this tweet just yesterday, and you look at the replies, and it's hilarious, and they're all dated from 2015. So the infamy of this tweet hadn't even taken shape, and there was lots of fun happening in the comment section, as you might expect from a Stephanie McMahon tweet. But it wasn't just a bunch of eggs and trolls, and nowadays we call them the guys who played for the blue checks. They're just a little bit too online. Heck, it was a women's wrestler at the time, or should I say diva, that responded. Here's what AJ had to say in response to Stephanie's tweet. There it is. Why can't I read it? There we go. At Steph McMahon. So she replied directly to the tweet. "And yet they receive a fraction of the wages and screen time of the majority of the male roster." That was the second tweet. Let me read you the first one. This is great presentation on my behalf. So let me read this in a more chronological order. That I should have arranged these. So your female wrestler, this is her response. "Your female wrestlers have record-selling merchandise and have started in the highest-rated segments of the show several times. And yet they receive a fraction of the wages and screen time of the majority of the male roster. Hashtag use your voice." Shots freaking fired there by AJ Mendez, as her Twitter handle refers to her as. Now think about all this in context. It's like, so what? Someone, kind of complaining when their boss says something, but this is Stephanie McMahon. Now, I don't have the vitriol for Stephanie that some people do. I tend to save that for her husband a little bit more. But one of the things that I think would really annoy people would be the way that Stephanie tried to make herself the public face of the good WWE. And on top of that, though, people in like this Discord space really had a problem with her like taking credit for the women's evolution. I think people really had a problem with this person who was not a women's wrestler being like, the savior of women's wrestling, the way it was presented. And you would see tweets by other female wrestlers in the company, and it's nothing but praise for Stephanie McMahon for basically crediting her, for the revolution. Now, I've always been of two minds by that. I think the hate that Stephanie gets sometimes can be a little outsized, and we have no idea what the role is that Stephanie ever played in getting women's screen time, because we do hear occasionally stories leak out that the biggest advocate at times for the women in the women's segments was Stephanie. So I think she probably deserves some credit, not as much credit as she was willing to give herself, and not as much credit as the company was seemingly ready to present her in. Everything was about making her look good in the process of this, so it rubbed people really, really the wrong way. But as I mentioned, at the time especially, and even now, when it comes to the wrestlers and superstars commenting, it was nothing but respect and admiration for Stephanie. This was something different. This was an active contractor a few months before her departure from the company, but still within the company, straight up putting their cards on the table. Now, I don't really need to get into an argument about equal pay on here, because there was a lot of things on the drop down saying like, okay, does that mean your women's wrestlers now get paid the same as John Cena? That is stupid. Not that a women's wrestler should get paid as much, or if not more, than John Cena, but to assume that on like just the generic star quality level that those things would be equal in pay, I think that's pretty ridiculous. Should it be proportional? Yes. And in the case of someone like, say, a Becky Lynch, who definitely is, at times you could say he was the biggest star in the company, probably should be the top paid performer in the company. Derek points out something that's been actually really a lot in the news lately, and was so with the WNBA recently with some of their labor talks, as Derek announced. Not uncommon. We see it in women's soccer, and WNBA players asking for equity and only getting 9% of the revenue, when NBA players get 50% of the revenue split. And I think on that one, Derek, to be honest, because women's basketball does draw whenever it's promoted in the right way, that one to me sounds like the owners really like taking a loss in a lot of ways with the WNBA. So it's a very convenient tool for them to move around in terms of the books and all that stuff. So people try to tell, oh, they don't draw as much money. Well, they draw a significant amount, significantly more than what the pay proportion ever seems to be. And the issue of pay, obviously, in pro wrestling, I think goes to both men and women, but you can see where there could be some major pay disparities. But the way what people heard with this is that basically you just have corporate people doing corporate speak without any action. And I think that's the biggest thing when these corporations try to pretend like they're good citizens. No one takes issue necessarily with the work that they do. It's because it's done for the sake of self-promotion. And then you start to question what the actual good any of it has done. It's interesting take, Fernando. And I don't know if you were here earlier, because I talked about how I don't have, whether it's, Nikki Bella, AJ Lee. I did have, I'll just put those two because they were right there. You had Summer Rae. I'm trying to think who else was kind of around right in that time period. If you were around in that time period, though, I generally respect your work less as a wrestler. And that's not a personal thing. So don't be saying I think these people suck. I'm just saying, as you pointed out, like when it comes to like the horseman level of women, I just think of them. I think more highly of their careers. So I think more highly of them in general. I don't think it's really the fault of a lot of the performers at the time. It's just the way in which they were presented. Yeah, absolutely, Derek. And I think the WNBA is a good spot to for those owners to call that revenue from. So what was great about this, though, is because of the way that Stephanie McMahon, who was a bad guy on TV, but Mrs. Benevolent corporate woman outside of it, couldn't really respond to AJ Lee in any meaningful way. She couldn't get into a Twitter spat with her. That would have done her no good, and she would have lost that. She couldn't have publicly denied the claims that she was making, because no one would have ever argued that they ever thought there was probably like an equal pay or any sort of that happening in WWE. So Steph just had to sort of grin and bear it. And this was Steph's obviously very thankful response. Thank you, at WWE AJ Lee. I appreciate your opinion. Hashtag use your voice. Now, do you ever get one of those emails at work from your boss that you can hear the condescending tone of like the thing at the bottom? Thank you for your attention in this matter. Whenever you hear that from your urgent attention, like that's the tone that Stephanie tweet had. But it wasn't just Stephanie that got involved. The old man, notable respecter of women and good treater of women, Vince McMahon, had to get in there. We hear you. Keep watching. Hashtag give divas a chance. You guys remember hashtag give divas a chance? Which is hilarious coming from the creative guy who's putting in the hashtag. Who's he appealing to? Who's he hashtag? Hey, if we can get this thing going, maybe the boss will hear this and we can get some. Again, this was a social media manager going, we have a little bit of an online firestorm here that we have to go ahead and quell. Let's get to some of your comments here. Fernando says, not trying to be mean, but the Bellas were not true wrestling talent. They were there because of their looks and were twins. Let's be real. I don't always agree, though, Fernando, and this might be a difference of opinion between you and I, that the wrestling talent is the most important thing. I think that they were pushed beyond their talent many times, and I think that's why the memory of them by really young fans is different than those of us who watched at the time. And Derek says, yes, WWE is credited for the women's evolution, but TNA, this is a golden comment right here by Derek. TNA doesn't get nearly as much credit for their contributions from Gail Kim, Awesome Kong, Beautiful People, Mickie James, Tara, aka Victoria. Absolutely. And I said earlier how NXT was the thing that got me kind of interested in women's wrestling. That's not true. It was TNA. It's that era of those Thursdays and Gail Kim and Awesome Kong and what was her name? Taylor Wilde and all of that era, ODB. That era was awesome. The women were many times the best part of TNA in that time period. It didn't translate to other companies, so that's why it doesn't quite get the credit. But for years, they had the superior women's roster, and I think even in the years when the fall offs were happening, I always felt like TNA just cared a little bit more about their women's wrestling. And Fernando says, Lita and Trish were the only good thing the women's division in the past. See, and I even take issue with them. Like, I agree they were big stars, and they were part of some fairly big storylines, but I can just remember like one or two moves from them. I don't really remember matches. I don't ever recall thinking they were really good wrestlers or they really could draw you in. Again, I have no problem with them being on the roster. There is more to that, but like just because Lita, that's like saying Naomi was a great wrestler. Just because the talent did athletic moves doesn't necessarily mean they were a great wrestler. Now Naomi fans are going to come after me. I think Naomi's a big star. I think I would push Naomi very, very highly if I had her on my roster. Don't think she's the most talented wrestler. So all of this really just kind of sat out there. If you look at that, that's February of 24. If I'm trusting what Derek was saying in the chat, and I have no reason to disbelieve him, you can see that that's like 2 months before she was out of the company. Now, her leaving the company, she's talked about it. She's talked about it a lot, but She talked about the mental health challenges that she faced, and she went to write a book. She found that one organization. She ended up getting involved with Glow. It's not like AJ Lee just like disappeared, but her leaving, obviously, it was. I don't think it was this tweet. I think she was in a pretty untenable situation. The company was suing her husband, like the person she went home and saw every single night. That was, can you imagine working and operating in that kind of environment, especially with the parameters of that lawsuit and who was involved and who was being alleged? And you have like, how are you going to see the doctor when your husband is saying that this guy is a malpractice guy? Like, it just can't happen. Let's see what Derek has to say. Derek's a firm believer that draws people to wrestling is, yes, the wrestling action from bell to bell, but people watch TV and movies because of the characters and engaging storylines. Oh yeah, Mickey James, Paige, and Victoria, they were really good as well, for now to point out. So I mean, that's a little bit different discussion, Derek, and I think we can have that on here. I agree in that when people watch a wrestling show, they want the finality to be about wrestling. They want it to be about wrestling. It's like, you watch a football game, you're expecting them to eventually get on the dang field, right? No matter how much you might like the pregame show or all the festivities, what you're there to watch is that thing. I think in terms of growing wrestling, though, it's got to be good wrestling storylines and not necessarily great wrestling. Great wrestling storylines generally have to include pretty good wrestling, but I don't think they're as exclusive. I think it's probably you do, Derek, but we can all have our opinions. And Derek Punk left after 2014 and AJ Lee on March 30th, so it's more than a year later. So I mean, I'm agreeing with you on that as well, but my point is more to say, think about it from how things escalated that November. So, he leaves. Punk left in early 2014. And then so it's March 30th, 2015 is AJ's last match. You talk about November when stuff really gets escalated, when the podcast happens, when the lawsuit starts firing up, stuff it got heated really quickly. So probably not the funnest place to work for her. Let's be honest. For now, I'll talk about Mickey James, Paige, and Victoria. Well, and all of them outside of Paige, Mickey and Victoria also did great things in TNA. Remember Hardcore Country in Impact? So this is the one. So whenever the returns happen, the Bellas, I acknowledge their star power a little, because I do acknowledge their star power, but like I don't think there's quite the fondness. Like the fondness, I think, is just in because it's something from the past, not necessarily because that thing in the past was great. I think AJ Lee's kind of like Lita in that way, that people liked her, remember her doing some moves, so they sort of superimpose that like major fandom onto her. Michelle McCool, I think, was solid, but no one, the way that they present her as like this returning legend, no one thought about Michelle McCool in that way at all. I think she is fine. I like she had the Mrs. McCool character and all that. I think that was kind of cool. No pun intended. Like that was okay. She did not deserve to be pushed on the level she was pushed. She's right near Coco Beware in the like the bottom of the Hall of Fame. Like, is this person greater than this person if they were a Hall of Famer? I think that one unequivocally you can say it's because of who they are married to. Derek noted that AJ was getting Punk chants during her matches. Derek said, I think the Bellas drew more interest on Total Divas rather than actually what they were doing in the ring. Probably, but if it resulted in them growing a fan base and have people turning into wrestling, it's kind of the same. But unless you're saying, though, that was the only place where the interest was. I also think that has to do with WWE being so focused on social media and all of that. So you have all this going down, but still nothing happens in terms of women's wrestling for a long time. I mean, let's face it, it's not till the summer of 2015. This is February. It's not till the summer that you really have like the big boom where they have the big call-ups. The three big call-ups in women's wrestling now kind of becomes a focus, and it's been a bumpy ride up and down since then. There's times when they're completely focused on it. There's other times when when it seems like they would almost just rather go back to their diva era. But it did happen, and the wrestling landscape changed. AJ Lee, though, never really lost. That's what's amazing. She never really lost her kind of grip on the division, and she would come up in rumors all the time. And I think, yes, there might have been acrimony with her husband, and she might have had acrimony with the company, but at least it wasn't such an insane situation that, like, when CM Punk coming back, where you knew kind of mountains had to be moved, and there was this whole other situation that happened in this other company that really had to yield that. AJ was a little bit different of the story. To be honest, I actually thought AJ was never going to come back. I thought AJ was one of those that was in wrestling just long enough that got out of it what she needed to. She had a lot of scar tissue, I think, from her time, and also for being supportive of her husband, which I'm not going to blame her for. I thought she'd never come back, but she did, and you know, I'm glad everyone has worked everything out. Feels like all the tensions are gone, and look at them. They're all one big, nice, happy family. Good for them. I think the Steph and Punk stuff is legit. I feel genuine chemistry like from them whenever they're interacting, and it always makes me wonder, like, what was their issue with each other? Because I don't know that everyone who has an issue with Trips automatically has that issue with Stephanie, but I know, because none of us, unless we were back there, none of us actually know these backstage dynamics and politics. Like, maybe someone can get some stuff fed to them, but none of us actually know. I do have to ask you, though, just to play a little devil's advocate here as we're wrapping up the show. And this is a very mean spirited question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is AJ Lee a sellout for coming back, for hanging with the people that she talked all the smack up? I'm not going to begrudge her for it, but we throw that allegation out at other wrestlers, and it's been nothing but positive for AJ. But think about the feeling we've had with WWE for the last couple of months, and the type of corporation that it has felt like, and the ick and the unease that everyone has had. But we don't put any of that on AJ for coming back. I'm not saying we should. I'm just saying we're probably a little inconsistent with how we're applying that. What's up, Maria? She gets some. She definitely does, because I think Ronda Rousey gets credit in general for just rising the boat on interest in women's sports. I think, to be fair to UFC, and UFC doesn't often get credit in these areas, they did create a division for her. Just like a few years later, they kind of created a division for Chris Cyborg. And then so she was very unbeatable and had that aura, and they were able to make a big star out of it. And I think MMA fans actually accepting women's MMA to a point where that was just like one of the big stars on their show was, I think, instructive for wrestling fans and how to balance their brain out. And I think she generally drove interest. And then once they brought her in, I think they had a solid foundation of women's wrestling from all of this that they had already built. And that year, I think she definitely helped elevate the visibility of that division 1,000%. What her impact is from that, I find her impact in women's wrestling to probably be greater as an MMA fighter than her time actually in the ring. If you want to know my true take on that. Derek pointed out that AJ Lee was a focal point of WWE programming for years. The romantic angles with Primo in NXT Season 3, Hornswoggle admire. Love angles with Daniel Bryan, Kane, CM Punk, John Cena, and Dolph Ziggler. I forgot about Kane. Yeah, that was part of that triple threat with Kane and Punk and Bryan, right? That was summer of 2012. Remember when we thought Vince was like marrying her on TV? Because she had the angle where she was supposed to get married to D-Bry, but instead she is saying yes to Vince, but the yes is to be the GM, and then The Rock comes out and rock bottoms D-Bry, and then Charlie Sheen comes on our TV. This is a funny tweet. Funny tweet from Fernando. He said, AJ Lee stayed away long enough where she does not come off like a sellout. Her husband is a total sellout. We're going to Saudi Arabia. You guys excited for WrestleMania in Saudi next year? Are we going? Are we going to have a meetup in the Royal Kingdom? Again, this company, I have less and less of problems with them doing shows internationally. And I think the idea of them doing the Saudi shows is a little more of a nuanced thing that deserves more nuance than we tend to give it. But a whole WrestleMania over there, that does feel very fan unfriendly. Like, again, I don't think that Saudi Arabia is this major tourist spot. Maybe I'm an ignorant American. And I at one point I was thinking, well, I was like, that's not, I'm like, okay, I get it. A big part of the draw of WrestleMania is the international crowd. People from the UK, from all over the world, they're flying into America to watch WrestleMania. I just don't think we're going to get the same reciprocation with all those Americans flying into the kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Don't think that's going to happen. Don't know if our European friends are going to either. I'm sure it'll look great. It'll be the grandest scale. Like they're going to, they're going to have gold-plated air or something like that. It'll be the most extravagant crap you've ever seen. But I didn't think of that, Maria. But it's just another WWE TKO thing, right? Because even when you have these other sports spectaculars in Saudi Arabia, they do feel very much more like one-offs, even though they're part of these big, like when you have these big fights that happen in Saudi Arabia or something, these big like concerts that happen, they're sort of these one-offs, and they're sort of, in their own thing or doing their own thing. WrestleMania is something that has a pattern to it, and there's tradition with it, and there's all that stuff, and it's been sold out. I mean, WrestleMania locations have been great this year, right? You had Vegas from last year, which people liked, but were a little worn out from the pricing in Vegas, which can get to you. There's also and then you had The Rock announce it. The Rock, was none of his announcements this year have had any consequence. Now we got the report that he might be done with WWE forever as a character. Favorite wrestler of all time. See ya. Because we don't need him around at all, which means he's going to be around. He announces New Orleans. It's going to be Vegas again. And then it's Saudi Arabia. So like that sucks if you're a regular WrestleMania goer and you didn't want to go to like Vegas 2 years in a row. And then it's like, oh, babe, get your burqa ready. We're going to Saudi Arabia. I'm gonna be killed for saying all this. I should chill out. Derek notes, for those who don't know, Ari Emanuel, Mark Shapiro, Nick Khan, they're very strategic and cunning businessmen, so I'm not surprised WWE feels more corporate now. And it's weird because you talk about the time we were just talking about, like 2015, right around there, WWE felt extremely corporate in that time period. But it was, and they were doing plenty to gouge us at the time, but it was more of what they were trying to present to the world was that they were a corporate citizen and a corporate steward and all of that stuff. Now, the feeling of corporate is the feeling that we just kind of get from all companies right now is they are here to extract as much cash from you, and there is nothing you can freaking do about it. I mean, whether it's Adam Silver, Roger Goodell, Nick Khan and Triple H, Gary Bettman, I'm going to just throw him in there. I don't know. Is anyone paying for Rob Manfred stuff? It's sports and entertainment's freaking expensive right now. This is a chat right here, Derek. Will we see green shirt guy and the young black lady in the front row at the WrestleMania 43? Those guys will then have all the power, right? Like if green shirt guy gets a front row seat at the Saudi Royal Rumble in WrestleMania, then like he's impenetrable. Where the hell does that guy get his money from? And why is he not like throwing in super chats right now? I should get like a $2,000 super chat from green shirt guy just for being front row of my chat. Like, have you seen that he apparently gets no actual special treatment? He pays for all that. So I guess we all say that, right? We all say like, oh, if I was a millionaire, I would be doing all of this stuff. I'd be going around and watching wrestling shows, going to concerts. I think green shirt guy's actually doing that. Shout out to Green Shirt guy. Oh, that's harsh. That's harsh, Derek. And the person you're comparing to a dolphin is an NFL owner, not of the Dolphins. You don't want to be in that situation. But WWE executive management feels like great white sharks, while Tony Khan feels like a dolphin. Yeah, but he claims he's got more money than Jim Crockett, and he's a lot smarter and willing to fight. So let's see. I do, Maria. I do think Sammy is a lock to win the Rumble. And I think he's going to get his coronation at WrestleMania this year. I don't think he'll be headlining a WrestleMania in Saudi Arabia as the champ. I think he gets a Royal Rumble win there. I think we'll have, I don't know what we'll have. It's 2 years from now. I can't predict that, so I'm not even going to try. But I do think Sammy wins the Royal Rumble this year. Gives a high five to Green Shirt guy. Walks back up the ramp. Who you guys got tonight? Commanders or Packers? The Packers scared me last week how good they looked. But I can't figure that out if that's just like, is that Detroit Lions not being what we thought they were, or is like the 5-game sample size of Jordan Love that everyone has anointed him for? Is that legit? And I need to stop talking crap about that. And then like the Commanders, are they for real? Are they a 2-year deal? Jaden Daniels actually what we're being told he is? I don't know. I don't know. I love this time of year though. I know there's been a lot of talk about the wrestling numbers being down, but they do kind of always go down this time of year. Although it feels like we're in an exceptionally doldrum period of wrestling. Darius got Packers 24, Commanders 20. I think the Packers might be legit, especially with their defenses on the edge. I did a show about this a couple of weeks ago, Maria, and I'm on your wavelength with this. Maria notes that most of the wrestling fans are not of high income. We heard this for years, right? That's why, despite getting better ratings than anything else on cable, wrestling couldn't command these great ad rates because, except for Green Shirt guy, and we all got holes in our pants. And the high prices are going to kill the business eventually. Because right now, Maria, it seems like they're trying to really portray WWE as like this luxury product, this premium product that you got to pay out for. And eventually, like, the sheen will wear off. I think some of the sheen has already kind of worn off it. You know, a few years ago, it was becoming one of those places to be seen. Of course I paid. Like that's the thing, right? When you go some of these big festivals, some of the concert festivals with these crazy sticker prices, it's almost a flex, right? If you can get in, if you're able to. And I feel like WWE has that sort of vibe right now. Like I told you guys a couple of weeks, Raw's coming to town. I cannot afford a ticket. Ain't going. First time Raw's ever been here. I'm going to watch it on Netflix like all the rest of you. And I do think they run the risk of pricing out their customers. Again, Adam Silver was asked about this for the NBA in terms of the NBA. And he said, well, we're also a highlights league and there's many ways to access our product. And it's like, well, what you're basically saying is your core product just might be a little too expensive for people. And wrestling in the past on pay-per-view had been a premium product and you needed a cable obviously to watch Raw, but wrestling shows historically had reasonable ticket prices in order to draw, families. Like I said, like trying to take my kids, it would just be ridiculous. There was that report earlier, I want to say it's today or yesterday, that TKO said, well, Vince McMahon was more doing family pricing. And again, that's fine if you want to change up your business model, but I think it's very hard to go against the core kind of what your company has always been and the true spirit of your company in that way. Yeah, it's depressing, honestly, when I think about all that. Derek, I hope your football prediction comes true. It seems like a pretty fun competitive game. I mean, these primetime games have been insane, haven't they? Admit it. You went to sleep thinking Baltimore won, especially you guys in the West, on the East Coast, right? You went to sleep thinking Baltimore won that game and woke up to Josh Allen be the new MVP. I also thought JJ McCarthy was completely out of his depth, and then Zach's Bears proved otherwise. So what do we know? Yeah, primetime foot, and then the Dallas Philly game was pretty good. So I've been liking primetime football. Even the Brazil game was okay, but weird vibe, and a whole weird vibe with the Chiefs. I don't know why we're talking so much football on a wrestling podcast. Well, for this being a supposed short show, we went the customary 55 minutes. A little bit of a delay getting on. I was having some trouble with StreamYard. StreamYard wasn't being the most user-friendly platform in the world, but I really appreciate Fernando, Maria, and Derek coming in and keeping the chat going, keeping the chat alive. There's been some changes on YouTube with the algorithm and stuff like that, so it's been a little bit difficult to get in contact with all of you guys. And then myself, I've been kind of inconsistent on this show. So things haven't been able to talk to you guys as well, and things have been a little down lately. So I'm glad to see some of the chat come back alive. I'm going to keep playing with the time slot, guys. I'll be honest with you. I'm kind of liking Thursdays. It makes me a little bit easier to prep for the show, getting a little bit of space from Raw, a little bit post Dynamite. We'll see how the schedule works out. I'm liking the Thursday releases. We'll figure out how things are going to go. But once you guys get to football, I'm going to get to football. I think I'm going to go for a run, actually. Got to get the old heart rate going. You guys have an absolutely great evening.